Casey Nash, welcome to Suit Up the Podcast.
Thank you, Terrence. Thank you for having me.
Well, it is an absolute blast. First and foremost, I have to give you great kudos on your backdrop for people who are not watching this on YouTube and just hearing our incredible voices. You have a great set behind you with, are those Schleck animals in the corner?
Over here,
Yeah.
that is a little combination. I think I bought it Tractor Supply. My wife is not a big fan of that, by the way, but my grandkids are, and I am too.
That's awesome. I think that having little stuff like that really enhances the environment. Something that I've noticed recently is when I write, having the right cues around me, it helps me put me in a good mood.
I agree. I agree totally. Yeah.
Casey, for those listening, would you mind just sharing a brief biographical sketch with the audience?
Yeah. Well, as far as my writing, I started about 10 years ago writing novels, but before then, I'd written for some Christian magazines. I have a
Hmm.
37-year background as a pastor.
Hmm.
And so I retired from ministry and I've just, in recent months, gone to full time writing. And that,
Congratulations.
thank you, that has been tremendous. But I grew up kind of on the farm back and
Hmm.
forth. My dad, where he grew up, we owned that land. And so that's where my love for horses, livestock, all of that was born. And so I've been riding since I was knee high, and that really filters into my westerns. You know, my
Hmm.
love for the West. I've just had a love affair with the West for years, and
Hmm.
I go out west every summer, almost every summer, kind of a second home in Wyoming for me. And that's where a lot of my writing fodder comes from and when I travel and that kind of thing. So, just a little bit about my background. Of course, I'm married, have a wonderful wife, three children, and six grandchildren.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
That's really cool. It's great when you can have those kinds of experiences that fuel into the story and that you're continuing to do them.
Right.
Uh, I feel like what easily happens, especially now that, let's face it, with the internet today, people can basically just sit back in a chair and research anything that they're interested in. I
Exactly.
have discovered information about mega yachts for writing a story that I will never probably see in my lifetime, but I was able to watch the YouTube video on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it was really nice that brief, like week long, that Instagram and Facebook thought that I was actually going to buy one of those, and I wanted to be the man that these ads thought I was.
Yeah.
But being able to have those actual experiences and go and experience things like horseback riding, being in the West, especially when so much of writing is activating those sensory perceptions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. For me, like I said, travel just opens my mind up. And when you get out of your routine,
Hmm.
that's liberating in itself. And it seems, for me anyway, the creative juices just really flow when I'm sort of out of my normal pace of life. And I think that's, for me, that's why it's important that I do get away. And
Hmm.
even with my writing, I change up my settings. You know, I don't
Hmm.
burrow myself into my office and not be around anybody. I'm just the opposite, actually. I go to coffee houses. I was at
Hmm.
Chick-fil-A when it opened this morning, and I'm just a people watcher. And, you know,
Hmm.
they don't know it, but some of them end up in my stories.
Well, when you said that you've had a career in ministry, that 100% makes sense when you get from one to the other because so many of those skills that you have. My
Right.
grandfather was a pastor for a number of years, and
Yeah.
so I remember what that's like, just the social component to it and the learning to work with people and picking
That's
up
right.
on people's emotions, feelings, and those little subtle nuances of other people that help so much as a writer.
Absolutely. And my ministry, it has been amazing, which I really say that my books now are my ministry.
Hmm.
You know, we don't have time today, but just so many opportunities of late that
Hmm.
have happened. And I'm like, wow, you know, that is so cool. But you're right, my ministry experiences funnel right into my writing and so much about relationships. My books
Hmm.
are they're Western, but they are full of real life relationship stuff. In
Hmm.
fact, some of the Amazon reviews, I get tickled about them. I had one lady put on there recently. She said, like with the Jubal Stone series, she said, that's my family now, you know? And she even mentioned his son, and she said, I would love for you to write more about Monty, and I'm like, well, I will, I mean, I love that, but it's people
Hmm.
connecting
Yep.
to real life people. And, for instance, I've shared this many times, but when I'm writing, it's powerful to me
Hmm.
that a scene can touch my emotions. And
Hmm.
you know about that as you
Yep.
write. It's like these characters take on a life of their own. And for instance, if it's a sad situation, a lot of there's, in the
Hmm.
West, the frontier, there's a lot of death and all that kind of stuff. And so when one of those scenes I'm writing that, I mean, I get stirred emotionally. I mean, a lot of times I'm just kind of weeping and I'm like, oh, this is crazy, because I'm writing this one.
Hmm.
And then same way with laughter.
Hmm.
I know, some people maybe walk them off. Oh my goodness, what's wrong with him? But I'm just in the mode there with those characters.
Hmm.
And I love that. And I think about the power of your words to move emotions, not only the reader, but the writer.
Yep.
That's pretty cool. It's an amazing trip.
Hmm. Writing is one of those just genuinely great experiences. I I remember that as even a little kid, I'd always take a notebook around with me because my immediate reaction to almost anything is to write. Like that's the
Yeah,
immediate feedback mechanism to experiencing life. And I think that's one of the things that I really love about your Jubal Stone series. So I read Bringing Law to Lobo, which so much fun. This is like the 90 somethingth book in the Jubal Stone series. Like,
it is. Isn't that wild?
congratulations. But I think that I was just on a podcast with a buddy and about how I think that shorter fiction is the new thing for stuff in that men's adventure vibe. And I
Right.
think that you're proving it really here, where you have a serialized character that people can really just join into the story, like an episode of Gunsmoke.
Exactly. And that's exactly what it's patterned on. So that I've seen a lot of the reviews of people who would say, I read the whole book in one sitting
Hmm.
because it's not a thick book. Now, some of them are longer than others. I just
Yeah.
finished close to 50,000 words, but these are the shorter ones, especially with us men. We have a shorter, attention span than women, it seems like. I don't know. But yeah, the shorter really works. And you're right, it's like an episode
Hmm.
that you finish it and you're waiting for the next one and you pick right back up. And it has, Terrence, it has blown me away, the longevity
Hmm.
of the series. And my publicist says the same thing. He says, this doesn't happen. This doesn't happen much. Very rarely are you going to write 94, 95 books
Hmm.
because, and I write with some very good writers. And a lot of times after, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 books, they're in another series.
Yeah.
Well, what I've loved about the Jubal Stone is those readers, the readership, they know that character. So you don't have to spend your next book trying to introduce him. They're
Hmm.
already there, and family members and all the things going on. You just pick up and you go. So I love that too. That I'm so familiar with Jubal and his feelings and his thought patterns and his family and Waco and all about Texas. I've learned so much about Texas as I've written this
Hmm.
series because I wanted to be authentic
Yeah.
and be real and true to history. And I take great pains to do that. That probably 98% of the settings, towns, whatever, they are real places. Now, some of them are ghost towns now.
Yeah.
I love all that history to those ghost towns. Every now and then, to make that plot narrative work, I have to come up with a little town, a
Uh-huh.
little countryside or whatever. But as far as what was going on in the time of Jubal, that is straight up history.
Hmm.
And I tell you, as you know, if you're not true to history, your readers will find you out
Hmm.
They will hang you from the nearest tree, you know. And I've had a couple of that because nobody's going to be perfectly accurate, and I would say too, even with the Western genre, there's some things that are very subjective. I've
Hmm.
had people arguing about a gun caliber, going at each other, like verbally shooting at each other. But it's like, okay, both of you can't be right. So I'm like, I don't get into splitting hairs, but
Hmm.
I want people to know, for instance, and I find some very humorous things like Dr. Pepper was founded in
Yes.
Waco in the 1800, 1880. So this is a
I
time
didn't
of,
realize it was that old.
yeah, it is. And it was within a drugstore. And so Jubal and them are drinking Dr. Peppers. And it's so cool because, a lot of people maybe initially say, oh, wait a minute, Dr. Pepper wasn't even around. Go look at history and you'll see it's tracking right where it is. So those are some cool little nuggets, treasures that pop up every now and then. You're like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that.
What does your research typically look like? Do you have like a few favorite references? Do you just tend to Google search? Like, I'm genuinely curious, what's your go-to, I need to know facts about this era and this place?
Well, probably a lot of online search
Hmm.
and then reading other Westerns. And I'm probably like some of the other writers in the past. I kind of cannibalize. I mean, I'm not reading a story for its story.
Yes.
I'm really reading for the history
Yes.
and the way they turn a phrase, or oh man, they just captured that so well. Of course, changing the wording and all, not
Yeah, you're
you
not
know,
plagiarizing, but you
but
want to like it's that thing where I have found there are three different levels of writing that I read. There is writing that's so bad I don't think that I can ever write again because I'm not much better than them, obviously. There's writing that's mediocre and I'm like, "Oh, I can do this better." And then there's writing that is well, okay, four. Because then there's writing that's so good, I don't think I could ever match it. Why bother? And then there's writing that's so good, I'm like, I'm pumped. I want to be an amazing writer too.
exactly, and that's where I think other people's influence comes in. The Louis L'Amour, he's a gold standard.
Hmm.
People like that. And I've read some of his, but it was interesting what you said earlier, Terrence. You when you were younger, you walked around with a notebook or whatever. And see, I wasn't there. I had no desire to write or. I was saying the other day, I think it was on a podcast. I said, academically, that I wasn't interested. Football, sports,
Hmm.
horses, yeah, yeah, count me in. But it wasn't until I don't know, later, 25 years ago or more, that I started thinking about putting my thoughts down.
Hmm.
And that's where I started writing for 4 or 5 Christian magazines.
Hmm.
And then in 2013, um, 2014 actually, I think is when my first book came out, but I started writing it in
Hey,
2000.
congratulations. You're at like 10 years now.
Exactly.
That's
10
awesome.
10 years. Yeah. Yeah. So, the way that started was so cool. I was reading another book and it was just the title Start by John Acuff, I think.
Hmm.
And he was talking about this is right after Katrina, a couple of years
Hmm.
later. And he talked about all the new entrepreneurs that were born out of
Hmm.
Katrina. He said a lot
Yeah.
of people lost their job, it devastated the economy. And so people started doing things they always wanted to do,
Hmm.
but they never had the courage to do it. But now it was like, well, I've got to do something.
Hmm.
And they took off on their dream. And that was the next round of entrepreneurs. And so he
Hmm.
asked the question, what is it that you've been wanting to do, but you haven't started? For me, the light came on a book. So I began to write that book. Well, here's the crazy thing about it. And you understand this as a writer. You start writing something. My first thought was, this may be the stupidest thing I've done in my life. And
Hmm.
I didn't even tell my wife until I was 90% finished with that book. And of course, I tell this, I gave her the manuscript when I finished. I've written a book. I want you to read it. She said, okay, okay. She was surprised I'd written it. And she read it, came back, and she was just in tears. I said, was it that bad? She said, no, it was that good. And of course, she was being very gracious. But that was my first book. It was my first series was Miracle at College Spring Ranch. I think there was 6 books in that.
Hmm.
Setting of it was Horse Creek, Wyoming, and that's a whole different story there, but that's where I connected with a rancher out there. I dropped by his house one day. I was working with some church planters out there, and I said, I kept seeing Horse Creek on the interstate, and I'm like, I've got to go out there. That's the setting of my book. I just need to say, I've been there. I drive and I drive and I drive 25 miles, and I finally come to Horse Creek, and it was very anticlimactic. It was a firehouse and a mail drop. I'm
Hmm.
like, you got to be kidding me. So anyway, there was a house about a half a mile down the road, and that's where I met this rancher. I didn't meet him that time. I left him a book. He called me. He read my book, and he said, "Man, I love what I read." He said, "When you come back out, I want you to come visit my ranch." I've been staying there for over 10 years now.
That's so
And
cool.
he has a 70,000 acre ranch, so he just gives me full run of that. But there's so much of the West that took place out there, like
Hmm.
the Indian treaties. And I
Hmm.
ride with his wranglers, working cattle and all that. So the West comes alive out there for me. It's just like your heart starts racing, and like, and the scenery is just amazing. So,
I think that people don't appreciate how much the West is still alive today. Just it's continued to be slightly pushed in more and more as civilization
right,
encroaches, but so
right.
many of the things that kept the Old West alive are still around today. Having to raise cattle, ranching, etc. So many of those major pillars of what we consider the
Yes.
West to be.
And the people out there are very interesting because they're very independent,
Hmm.
kind of stoic. But the misnomer some people have about folks around cattle and livestock and all that is maybe they're not that educated. Well, that's not what I find. I mean,
No.
my buddy is he was a veterinarian, then he became
Hmm.
a realtor, and a lot of people out there with doctorate degrees, you know.
Hmm.
So they're very smart. They're very read up on all that they're doing because they kind of have to rely on themselves and maybe a couple of people around them.
Hmm. My full-time job is I work in organic certification. So I've grown up in agricultural circles for a very long time. I'm just always surprised with sometimes the people you meet. I one time visited a hog farmer who was like a doctorate in medieval history battlefields that he contributes regularly to scholarly articles on the subject. I'm like, what?
What? That's hilarious, isn't it?
You just never know who you're going to meet. And I think that that's something to the case of the Western that in those stories, part of the magic is the stranger that comes into town or just discovering new people.
Right.
A fact of Jubal Stone that I really liked in reading the Lobo book is that he has a sweet tooth and a fondness for candy. Okay, so just little character
Yeah.
choice
Yeah. Right.
gives such a depth to who he is, and it makes him such a full human being right there with that.
Right. Well, I received a recommendation the other day from a legendary author, and he was bringing out the points of, Casey Nash puts you at the scene. And he was talking about the breakfast table. And it was kind of funny because I'm like, I remember that it's humorous, the family sitting there, and Monty knocks over his milk. And he's
Hmm.
done that a bunch of times, and his mother just scolds him, but he just doesn't learn. And then, of course, Jubal's always trying to kind of defend him a little bit and trying to wipe up the mess and all that. And then the mother spills her coffee, and the little boy runs around there and hugs her and says, "It's all right, mom. We all spill our, it's real. It's real.
Hmm.
It's what happens at the dinner table today, and it
Hmm.
was happening back then, but where people deeply cared for each other, and humor is so powerful. My dad had a saying, and I say it. I say a lot of things he used to say, because it's just there. But he would say you have to laugh to keep from crying.
Hmm.
And so much of their life on the frontier was unsure, disease, violence, anything could happen. And so the humor is that medicine, that just helps you through. Like, we're going to make it. Yeah, it's hard. We're going to make it though.
Hmm.
But I appreciate you remembering that point, bringing that up. But yeah, I love to put those things in there. And Jubal has a lot of humorous sayings, like when he
Hmm.
goes on a man hunt, he calls it a coon hunt. And he got that from his dad, who was a lawman. So that kind of, that'll show up in a number of the books when he starts to go looking for somebody,
Hmm. When you've so at this point you have like 90 some books in the Jubal Stone series. Do you have like a character Bible or a how do you keep track of the facts at this point? Because you
Yeah,
have a lot of stories
right.
of the same
Right.
character.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy. I don't have a Bible of characters. They are so I guess they're so ingrained in my mind. Um,
Hmm.
and I have the other books I pull up a lot of times, like, and this is what I love about this series is I introduce new characters on the way, and I know that that character is so unique
Hmm.
that there's going to be a the return of so and so, and people start asking about that, like, oh, I love that character. Are we going to see him again? And I want to say, well, when I know, I'll let you know, but I think you will. But I keep a lot of notes on legal pads,
Hmm.
and I just fill them up. Probably not as organized as I need to be. I want to be, but it's working. It's working. I do remember those characters. If you mention one of them, I could kind of rattle off, their idiosyncrasies and just remember them. Like, the blacksmith, Curly Snipes. He's interesting. I've written several stories about him. I've had people, when are we going to hear about Curly again? I love that. I love that because Curly is stuck in their mind. Something about him
Hmm.
resonate, and he's kind of one of those typical gentle giants,
Hmm.
big, strong blacksmith, and he's sweet on the deputy marshal, who's a female. One of the deputy marshals, Fiona Miller, and so she can do no wrong in his mind. So he's always defending her, and of course she and Jubal are at each other all the time. Just go, but I mean, they would. Spend their life trying to protect each other, but
Hmm.
they just let each other have. And people like that bantering,
Hmm.
some, just okay. These you can tell they really care for each other, but they're not afraid to laugh and poke fun at each other and that kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Well, again, it builds out the cast in the world because like that's how shows like Gunsmoke work is you
Right,
build up this cast of characters. My favorite Western show is Maverick. And one of the things I love that it did so well is it introduced those random extra characters like Samantha, whose last name I can't remember, but she just would show up every now and again, the episodes, to be the
yeah,
femme fatale thief character. And having things like that just makes the world seem more realistic, especially since, let's face it, the Old West wasn't it as big as it was. It
right,
wasn't that populated to the point that if you were in the right circles, you wouldn't see the same people again.
exactly. And my stories, and I again take great pains with this, is that I have to be careful and studied up on the next story. Is that I don't want to rewrite a story I've written.
Hmm.
And I read some books sometimes. I'm like, I've read this. It was different characters, but I've read the story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean. And so there's got to be some hooks. There's got to be some twists. It's got to be like, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Hmm.
Something like that. And so, but I love the new characters. They're new blood, and they give you such mileage. You can just take off with them, and then come back into the story. And then a lot of times when I finish that character, I've just fallen in love with him. I'm like, oh, there's going to be another book about him or her, that kind of thing. Like, we got one review the other day, and it mentioned this is a book that's about to come out, hunting down Joey Diamond's killers. But I mentioned a woman in there. She's really like a witch, but
Hmm.
but her name is Gypsy Rose. Well, I'm like, Gypsy Rose, that could resurface. Be on the lookout for that. Just little things that are different. That make the reader stop and say, "Oh, that's interesting." Reading her
Hmm.
description.
Well, it keeps the novelty alive. So I'm a big fan of like the hard-boiled detective stories. Those, I can't remember who it was that said, but basically the premise was you can have the same story, the same type of story pop up again and again.
Right.
But as long as you are there, you like being with the detective, you're going to go along for the ride. Because
Right.
that's the thing. You need to be plot is great, but without
Yeah.
good characters, no one wants to be there.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think too with Jubal and his family, just just by virtue that chronologically they're getting older, they're
Hmm.
going into different seasons of their lives. You record
Hmm.
that, and people are walking along because he can't stay 30 years old forever. We wish we could, but we can't. And so he's moving on. But as he gets older, he's maturing.
Hmm.
His demeanor, he's becoming a little more patient, you know,
Hmm.
because he's kind of a hard twist, firm hand, and yet he's got a very gentle side to him. I mean,
Hmm.
he adores his family, like we all love our families. And he is such a champion for the law. I
Hmm.
mean, if you break the law, you're going to be his enemy, you know, and he'll come down hard. And yet, in a number of the books, he would be the first to say, let's give him another chance, you
Hmm.
know. So
What has it been like personally, just seeing the evolution of your character over these 90 installments?
yeah, it's been pretty incredible because the first time you see Jubal, he's 14 years old. He's standing in a corn crib and he's looking through the slats of the boards and watching his family being murdered.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that's gripping. And then what happened after that? And I would say also just to inject here
Yeah.
is someone that's listening would say, well, what book would you recommend reading first? I would say the first two because you
Hmm.
get the background. After that, they're pretty much standalone, and there are even some that I co-wrote.
Hmm.
I other authors bring their characters into the story. That's a whole nother round. That's pretty exciting stuff. So, but you do see Jubal moving in his understanding. I mean, he's kind of a prodigy when it comes to the law because he becomes a deputy at 16 years old.
Hmm.
I think a sheriff at 18 and then a U.S. Marshal in his 20s, which was
Hmm.
almost unheard of. I mean, that's pretty young.
Quick question, just so for the listening audience who might not know the distinguishing differences, because I have a vague understanding of the differences, but the difference between a sheriff and a U.S. Marshal would be in the Old West what?
Well, I think part of that would be territorial.
Hmm.
Uh, Marshall has such a much wider range, and he's doing a lot of federal work where a sheriff is doing just the town. But there's some overlap in the
Yeah.
larger towns, and this is another point of contention with some people out there. Oh, well, they didn't have town marshals in, or they didn't have this, they didn't have that, and then you almost are stomping on Gunsmoke, man. I mean, wait a minute now, So I would say that's probably one of the big things is the marshals are more the federal agents.
Hmm.
They work under judges like Jubal works under Judge Leon Brewster, who's a real feisty old, magistrate that they really care for each other, but they're always just at each
Oh,
other.
their interactions were great in Lobo.
Oh, well, good, good, good. Well, that's another one. And some people the nickname for Brewster is Rooster Brewster. Because he's like a rooster. He just with his strutting around but anyway. So I think the sheriff is going to be a lot more local,
Hmm.
and his domain or his responsibilities are going to be a lot less. The marshals had a lot of court duties, a lot of
Hmm.
testifying, a lot of extraditing prisoners across state lines or across the state.
Hmm.
At least that's my understanding, and that's kind of where I write from with Jubal.
Hmm.
He's commissioned sometimes to leave Texas and go somewhere else. He could be under. In fact, I wrote two books with my daughter
Oh,
recently,
that's cool.
and she is quite a writer. I tell you, she's a lot better writer than I am. But uh, and her name is Ren. That's her pen name, Ren Nash. But we wrote together, and so I had Jubal in Colorado.
Hmm.
Under, he was brought there by the governor, and so um, he didn't come introducing himself as a marshal, but he had a job to do. So they do cross state lines and just do a variety of things.
Hmm. Well, again, I think that's what's really neat in the modern. Most of my experience with what the Marshals do today comes from reading Elmore Leonard because, of
Right,
course,
right.
But
Yeah,
I think that that's the cool thing about that role of the U.S. Marshal is that it's something that persists to today with many of the same responsibilities, although different, and it
right.
gives you such wide range for that story engine, that opportunity for adventure to happen.
Exactly. And I think it's like everything, law today is specialized. There's so
Hmm.
many different branches and groups and all that, where so
Back
much,
then.
oh my goodness, it was just right at the moment, like the Texas Rangers protect the settlers and fight the, that kind of thing. Each one of them had a purpose, and it was like a dire need. And then it evolved, and now we have such specialization in those areas, and some of that's changed, and some of it's a little bit of the same.
For outside of the Jubal Stone series, tell me a little bit about the other books you've written.
Yeah, well, I mentioned that first series called Miracle at Cold Spring Ranch, and then I am involved in two other series right now. One of them I just kicked off, and it's Dove Taylor, U.S. Marshal,
Hmm.
man from Iron Mountain. And Iron Mountain is in Wyoming. It's right down the road from Horse Creek, actually. So I know that area. And so we just kicked that off, and I'm actually writing that book in first person,
Oh.
which is kind of an oddity with Westerns, is what
Hmm.
my publicist tells me. And I have to tell you, I was inspired by my daughter because we wrote those books. We wrote them in first person,
Uh-huh.
writing her character, I'd write mine. So it's really interesting, but it inspired me, and so I started this new series in first person. And my publicist said, "I want you to stay with that. That
Hmm.
that is going to be a big, big hit." He thinks it'll be bigger than Jubal. I'm like, "Hey, okay, I'm down with it." And then also I have a third one, which actually is the second one is right behind Jubal time wise, but it's called Eutychus Bly Lawman.
Hmm.
That's set in Kansas.
Okay.
What's neat is Jubal actually trained him as a lawman, but Eutychus, and that's an interesting name, Eutychus Bly. But he was kind of a pacifist. He's raised, I don't know, very religious family that did not believe in picking up a gun.
Hmm.
Consequently, they lost their homesteads and land several times.
Yeah.
Eutychus even had a baby brother that was burned up in the house. Of course, the
Oh.
ones that
Hmm.
were trying to run him out didn't know but he,
Yeah.
he did nonetheless. And then the last time someone came and burned him out, he just had that moment where he said that's enough. But then he went on his own, and then they almost killed him.
Yeah.
And then the governor reached out to him and said, "I want you to be a range detective, and I'm going to
Hmm.
train you. I'm going to give you every resource." And he took to it so quick and so adept with his gun skill, like shooting long range. And so he went and spent, I don't know, 8 months, 10 months, a year with Jubal and his deputies. And
Hmm.
they trained him. And now the governor sends him all over the state. And it's mostly about land grabbers.
Hmm.
But that is a very interesting series. And Eutychus is such an interesting guy. In fact, and it's a very popular series. In fact, I'm working on a book now that will be out soon. But and I would say this too, Terrence. One of the things that we've seen that work well for us is pre-orders.
Hmm.
Now, you'd ask me, 2 years ago, pre-order. I'm like, I don't really know, but we started doing these pre-orders on my books, the Jubals, the Eutychus, now also the Dove Taylor U.S. Marshal. In one of the Bly books, my publicist told me, he said, "Yeah, I need to finish that one up. It's got 4,500 pre-orders." I said, "What did you say?" I said, "Did you say 4,500?" He said, "I said 4,500." That blew me away. But that doesn't work for everybody. And there
Hmm.
is also a risk
Yeah.
because if you say, as you know, on Amazon, like if you do a pre order, well, you're going to put it out there 6, 8 months before it's going to be out. But some writers may not meet that deadline, and it's a big mess when you don't.
Hmm.
But I'm thankful my publicist trusts me. I've got 3 or 4 pre orders right now, and I'm usually working on 2 or 3 books at a time. And
Oh, that's impressive. Wow.
I love it. I love it. And there's a reason for that. Well,
Hmm.
first of all, I want to get through with them.
Hmm.
But also, it keeps me fresh.
Hmm.
Like, you run with one like this morning. I'm an early writer. I write about 8 to 10 hours a day.
Wow. That's
And
very impressive.
it's like I that's a discipline now. And I'm an
Hmm.
early riser. I'm on farm time, I think, but I was, up at but that's in my brain now. And like I'm packing up and leaving to go somewhere to write. Um, and so, just working on those. But a couple of these pre-orders right now, and in fact, I got the numbers because I'm going to be speaking to a group of writers tomorrow, and I wanted to share this concept of pre-orders.
Hmm.
My publicist said one of them, which I have a little mini series within the Jubal Stone, and the first book was Cattle Killers,
Hmm.
because it's the heart of Texas, and man, they're cattle people, and they always have been.
Hmm.
It was the lifeline, the lifeblood.
Yeah.
The Cattle Killers was about a guy that strategically uh, introduced tick fever into a lot of herds. He sold sick cows. He
Oh.
could build his herd and make the money.
It's basically
And
like stock shorting today in the,
yeah,
but in that
yeah,
case it was livestock shorting.
exactly. And so uh, that book has been out a couple of weeks, but the one behind it is called Cattle Kings.
Hmm.
And my publicist, and by the way, my publisher is Dusty Saddle Publishing.
Yep.
They
Great
do an
company.
excellent job. I've been with them a couple of years now, and it's an amazing relationship that I have with them. But I was just talking to my publicist about the Cattle Kings. He said there's over 2,000 pre-orders on that one. It hadn't been out that long, like as a pre-order.
Yeah.
But what that does is stimulates me. It's like,
Hmm.
I gotta get this done, because there's a third one behind it. And the readers are asking for it. So that's the coolest thing when they buy a pre-order, which you haven't even finished.
Hmm.
But people are buying it and they're saying, when's it coming out? When's it coming out? And then you get that one out. And, usually if you build your readership, they're going to buy what you print.
Yeah.
And so the onus is on us about you write a good story, you stay true
Hmm.
to the brand, and
Hmm.
you're disciplined. Because for me, this is my job. This is my career now. This is I take it very serious. Like I have to move things around so I can write. And like the podcast or Zoom
Hmm.
or whatever. These are important to me. Like
Hmm.
I love to tell my story, and again, I appreciate the opportunity today. But you know, and I explained the difference some other times about the difference between a professional writer and a hobby writer.
Hmm.
And I think I started out as a hobby writer. Everybody does, I think. Like, I got my first book printed, and then I'm like, okay, and then you go on from there. But then you have to sell your book. You have to
Hmm.
buy your
Very writing the book and selling the book are two different things.
absolutely. And some writers don't understand that, and I know some people would say, "Oh, I can't afford a publish." You can't afford not to have one almost,
Hmm.
because I can't do what they do. If I did, I wouldn't be writing, and if I
Yeah.
wasn't writing, I wouldn't have anything to sell. You know,
Well,
so
I feel like it's a lot. Like people don't appreciate that writing, we talk about the art, we talk about the craft. Let's get down to dollars and cents. This is still a business, which means it doesn't matter if you're the best writer in the world unless there is a distribution, unless there is a way of getting in front of eyes, unless there's marketing. No one's going to know that you wrote a great book.
that's it. That is it right there, and that's a hard lesson for some writers to learn. And even sometimes, some writers will get to that upper echelon, and then they may think, "I think I can do this. I think I can. I am really good. I think I can do this." They crash the moment they do, because what you've just done is divided your time. I
Hmm.
mean, I have a whole team working on my stuff. I have people assigned to me to help me. That
Hmm.
means, Carl, I can send out an email or call or whatever, and just within a few minutes, I'm talking to someone about something that's on my mind or that needs attention. And that's another thing in my mind that sets DSP apart from other publishers. Sometimes man, you can't, you won't hear from them for
Hmm.
weeks.
Yeah.
I, I can text my publicist right now, and I guarantee you within 5 minutes, he's going to be back with me. That means the
Hmm.
world to me. And another thing, Terrence, I'd say with them, a publisher promoting is, with mine especially, is that I have a lot of ideas, man. I mean, my mind, it does not, at night, I'm just, it's like
You
people say,
don't get to 90 plus books in a series unless you have a brain like that. Again,
that's
just
right.
people, check out Jubal Stone. Dear goodness, this is incredible that you have such a great catalog.
Thank you.
Before I get too distracted on this point, I do want to just throw out there, it's so cool that you have these multiple series too, because I don't know if your brain works like this. Mine, I feel like I'm always I have to have two ideas right at the same time. Otherwise, I just get bored. And you have
Exactly.
something else to like lean into at any
Right.
moment. I get
Right.
distracted from the other.
Absolutely. And that's it, is you can turn your energies to another series, another book. And, people said, well, do you get writer's block? I've never had writer's block. I've never, and I thank the Lord. I believe he's given me creativity like he's given all of us different
Hmm.
creativity. But even as I'm laying on my bed and on my pillow, I am thinking of characters. I'm thinking of a story, and then I just fall off to sleep. And sometimes I'm like, I got to remember that. And usually I can. There's something
Hmm.
I just put in my mind. I'm like, I got to come back to that. Another thing is, I just love life, and every part of my life is like a seedbed.
Hmm.
Like
Yep.
I have a 30-acre goat farm, and I'm looking out right now. I see my goats, I see my horse, and I'll just sit here and watch. They're all different colors, and I count most of them I know by name, but there's some little different characteristic there that I can capture, write down, whatever. I don't know when I'm going to use that. It's kind of like when I would do my sermons,
Yeah.
always looking for fresh illustrations.
Hmm.
I would do my message early in the week, but the illustrations may change 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
It may be when I stood before the people, I said, "Yeah, I got to tell you about this, what happened yesterday that goes along with this." I'm like, that's not a coincidence. But the same over the book, I will make notes, and I've got them all over my desk and all over the place, just little notes, marker board, um, with a name or something I saw, or maybe the way somebody was walking that just looked so. I've never seen anybody. I'm going to put that down. I'm going to try to capture that. Don't know where to be, but it's amazing. It just comes right back into a story,
Hmm.
or a word. I love to learn new words, and and a lot of them are nuanced, but then some of them are the old words. Like
Hmm.
my dad used to say things, and I didn't know what he meant. And I'm in the Western slang. I'm reading. I'm like, that's what he meant. I'm like, oh, I've heard my dad say that, and now it makes sense. And then I put it in the story, and it makes
Hmm.
sense. And a lot of people say, I'd not heard that in so long. I'm so glad you put that. That kind of thing. So people appreciate your creativeness,
Hmm.
and they know if you're doing that because it's work. You know it's work. Um, Things don't. I don't just sit here and everything just pops up and I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it flows, and
Hmm.
sometimes I'm like, think about this. I'm just kind of putting my head in my hand, and I'm like, okay, I think. And and another thing, I don't. I've written with outlines, but I typically do not use an outline.
Hmm.
The way it starts for me is probably backwards for compared to a lot of authors, but I start with an idea.
Hmm.
I usually have my title immediately,
Okay.
and then I will do a blurb for it, and that's really
Oh, hmm.
pre-orders start, or
Yeah.
that's the genesis of them. I just capture it in 3 or 4 sentences, and I'm off. That doesn't mean I know exactly how to. It's like I was doing a co-write. I was trying to think of the title of that. Dancing with a Dead Man.
Oh,
Okay.
great title.
Yeah. So we were writing. We got like, I don't know, almost 3/4 done, and he said, "You think we need to change the title?" I said, "Just hang on." I didn't know exactly where it was going to be, but I knew it was going to set up, and it
Hmm.
did. This guy, he was about to be caught and probably killed. And I said, she's dancing with a dead man. She didn't know it. And so just ideas like that is enough
Hmm.
to get my motor running, and I'm off with a book. Like this morning, I started a new book. I
Oh,
started the
congratulations.
Thank you. I started the second book in the Dove Taylor U.S. Marshal, the first person. And man, I am stoked about that book. I'm like, I am having a ball in this first person stuff.
Hmm.
And I've got a little over 2,000 words this morning. I didn't write very long. I usually write about 1,000 words an hour.
Hmm.
Is what I've kind of
Yeah.
seen. Like if I spend 8 hours writing, it's 8 to 8,500 words.
Yeah.
Not that I'm like, oh, I got to hit that, but that's sort of how I roll.
Yeah.
One day recently, a week ago or more, I actually went on a little writers getaway to Tennessee and just some buddies, some friends of mine had a place. And I just went up and I wrote every day. I wrote
That's so cool.
one day. I wrote 12,000 words. That's the most I've ever written, but
Nice.
it was just kind of like it was flowing.
Yeah.
Like, all right, hang on, let's go. And there's times, Terrence, like I get up in the morning and I'm in here at 5:30, and I'm writing, and I look up and it's 11 o'clock.
Hmm.
Like, you know what? I need to take a break.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, there are some days you sit down and the words just don't want to come, but it's showing up is the
Yeah,
thing. Because
exactly.
even if I have a bad writing day and I only get 300 words on the page, I'll put in an
Exactly.
hour, 300 words. I'm like, you know what? That's 300 words more than I would have had if I didn't sit down to write today.
That's exactly right. And I would call that discipline. Is that there are days, and to be honest, that not every day I spring out of my bed and say, I'm going to write. Sometimes it's like you almost feel a little bit brain dead, but then,
Hmm.
get my coffee in me and all that. But I write anyway. I
Yep.
write anyway. And I show up, like you're saying, and I do my job. And you just stay with it. I mean, it's very simple. As Louis L'Amour said, you want to be a writer, write
Yep.
and write and write and write. And that's what I've done, because I look back and, 10 years ago when I started writing the novels and where I am today, I'm so grateful.
Hmm.
But it didn't just happen by itself.
Yeah.
There was a number of factors.
Hmm.
One of them is I did show up
Yep.
every day since then. And I can tell you this, I'm more excited about my writing today than I've ever been. And it's a lot of that's my publisher, my publicist, because the things on the burners,
Hmm.
and I mean, I have some crazy ideas sometimes, and I let me like, let's think about that. I kind of like that, and then we'll start hashing. He'll have a different turn on something, and then as we discuss it, it's like, okay, there it is.
Hmm.
But I'm just, the idea of thinking out of the box.
Hmm.
In your audience, you got to know your readers.
Yep.
You know, I was asked recently on a podcast, would you ever consider I think it was like putting a superhero in your story. I said, I already have one. Jubal Stone, he's a champion of justice,
Yeah.
but it's not going to be this supernatural, crazy power stuff.
Hmm.
That's where authors, and I would just say for any of them listening, is stay with your brand,
Hmm.
write for your readers. I mean, yeah, enjoy it. But like for me, Western's my home.
Yeah.
It's lifestyle. I feel like that's who I am. And I'm not going to go crazy and put in this stuff because I think maybe I'll get somebody interested. What you do is you turn off a bunch of your readers,
Yeah.
and you crash.
Hmm.
You can crash, and it's kind of like you got to be careful with not every thought you have is a grand slam.
That can we just put a pin in that, put it on the wall, not every thought is a grand slam.
That's right. Yeah, it needs to be vetted,
Hmm.
and you need to listen to people. And some will tell you, I don't think you ought to do that. And you know what? You probably shouldn't. You know, uh,
When my wife and I did went to a concert and we were there for like the pre-show and the guy was talking about how when he creates a song, he
yeah,
talks like he first runs it by his wife and she's his first filter. If she says, "No, David, that's stupid," he's like, "Oh, it probably is." But if he feels the need to fight for it, it tells him that there's something more than just an idea there.
right. I
And I
think
think
that's good logic. Yeah.
having a writers are far too often siloed as they're mad geniuses creating a vacuum. No, 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 no. Good writers work in some sense of a community where there's ideally someone that tells you that's bloody stupid. Don't do it.
That's right. That's right. Well, for me, my publicist is that person, but I also am in contact with a number of other authors. But he's direct because here's the thing: uh, everything we do as writers affects the publisher.
Yep.
I mean, it can be a win-win or it can be a
Hmm.
crash. And if you're just going to go off, and I think a lot of people are susceptible to this in all professions, is maybe you get a little stale or you're trying to think, I want to do something different, and you just jump out there and do something and you
Hmm.
ruin yourself and you lose your readers. And once you lose them, what I understand is hard to get them back. It's like you broke trust with them, you broke
Yeah.
faith with them. Is that, like when they read a Jubal, they expect certain things.
Hmm.
He's a man of integrity. Have had it. This has been funny, Terrence, like with some of my endings of my stories, like especially if you're going to do a part two.
Hmm.
Well, the cliffhangers, man, readers don't like cliffhangers usually. Some of them do, some of them, but I have been, I mean, they're like, I didn't like how you left the reader, blah, blah. I'm like, just hang on, hang on. But if the bad guy gets away, they don't like that.
Hmm.
It's kind of a ideologic kind of thing. Like I
Yeah.
expect the bad guy to be caught. Well, guess what? In real life, that doesn't always
Yeah, it's
happen.
true. Hmm.
But uh, part two, we're going to get him. He's going to get it. But I just think that's funny sometimes. But that's the conversation I've had, and I have with my publicist sometimes. We read the reviews together. We look at some things,
Hmm.
and what he would say is they are vested in your story.
Hmm.
Don't take it personally when they say something like what he says is they are into that story,
Hmm.
and something didn't line up with them. That doesn't mean at the same time as an author you knee jerk and you go that way, but you take that into your mind like you probably don't need to have too many endings like that,
Correct.
you know. And so that's been funny to me. But I tell you, Terrence, and I say this from my heart, I have not gotten over the fact that people will buy something I wrote,
Hmm.
and I'm humbled by it. I love that, and that's another thing that motivates me is that they like the story, and I like to write them, and
Hmm.
it's how I'm making my living now. So
Hmm.
it's a win-win for everybody. But I go back to the publisher is if the author is not making money, the publisher's not either.
Yeah, that's the thing.
They want you to succeed. And so
Hmm.
when they're giving you advice saying, I don't think you need to go that direction, you need to listen
Hmm.
because I think that can be some of the difference between a hobby writer and a professional.
Yes.
If you've got another job and that's what you make your money on, then you can dabble. You
Hmm.
can just throw this on. Well, I'm going to do it because I want to do it. Well, guess what? You're not going to be a full time writer and make a living doing that.
Yeah.
So I think there's some pitfalls that you got to be aware of, and you learn that. But if you listen, like you said earlier, you got people that are speaking into your life, and you're listening. They'll tell you. It's amazing how you can learn from other people, and that goes back to even some of the co-writes I've written.
Hmm.
Some authors say, oh, I'll do my own thing. I don't want. Well, I'd say, hey, with a Western, I'd say, I may ask them, have you ever read Louis L'Amour? Oh yeah, I've read all. Well, he mentored you,
Yeah.
invited him to speak into your writing.
Hmm.
And I get it. I mean, some people just want to write by themselves, and I do that for the most part, but I've done a number of co-writes, and I have learned from those writers every time because they're good writers. That's kind of my criteria. I want to write with the best because I
Hmm.
want to be challenged. I want to learn from this person. But you learn history, you learn, you know, um, the building of the Senate structure, and like, oh, I didn't know you could do that, or whatever. I'm still in the learning mode. I mean, I'm just like a sponge. I just picking up stuff and just trying to be true to who I need to be with my writing. But man, I want to be better.
Hmm.
I want to be at the top of my game, and it's not about I want to make a lot of money, which I'm not against that. You know what I mean? No, that is not the driver for me. The driver is I want to reach my potential.
Yes. Hmm.
And like if it's like right now, we're working on every book being audio,
Hmm. Oh,
and
great move. Hmm.
yeah, and AI is playing into a lot of things today, which I'm probably like a lot of people when you first hear about AI, but it's amazing what's being done.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about writing a book for you or anything like that.
Hmm.
Maybe even cloning your voice or something like that. It's interesting. Audios, possibly some Netflix opportunities. We'll
Hmm.
see. I'm not caught up in that either. It's like, you know, for me, I made a vow to the Lord when I started writing. I will not include profanity. I will not
Hmm.
include sexual stuff. And my readers love that
Hmm.
because they say, I can sit down, my family can read this book. Now, there's violence in it, obviously,
Yeah.
from Frontier and all, but there's not all that stuff. Oh, you don't need to see this, or you don't, because that comes back to me. And
Hmm.
so,
Well, at the
um,
end of the day, every book should be an expression of the author. I think that far too often it's easy to see people that are chasing the market, and
exactly.
some people can do that and be successful at it. Not
Yeah,
saying that they can't.
right.
But really, I always appreciate more just seeing that something is genuinely a reflection of who the person is, rather than they're doing it because they're trying to hit a criteria mark. And like touched a little on the ideas of faith here. I think that that's how the Christian life is supposed to be. Is
Absolutely.
it's supposed to be an expression of
Awesome. Yeah,
who you are, not
right.
necessarily that you're trying to meet an unmeetable standard. And I think
Exactly.
that that's a nuance that comes down to how one chooses to live, how one chooses to write, just chooses to be as a human being
Yeah.
far too often.
I agree with that totally. Is you've got to be true to yourself, and as I said, I believe God's given me the ability to write. All creativity is from Him.
Hmm.
To everybody, really. He created us. He created everything. So that's part of being like Him. Let's make man
Hmm.
in our image, I think. And so my first responsibility is to Him. And then, like you said, I mean, I sleep good at night. I'm proud of my work.
Hmm.
Like I said, I'm excited. I feel like I'm anchored.
Hmm.
I know where I need to go. I'm not just reaching. I'm
Hmm.
always open
Yeah.
to further and taking my books further and that kind of thing, but not to the extent like we're talking about, like you break faith with yourself.
Yes, you want to become a better writer always, but you don't want to pander to anyone's particular preferences just to
That's
try getting a few more copies sold.
right. No compromise. Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Well, and I think that to your credit, you've built a really great name and brand with your books, and that's the thing that readers connect to. When they connect with you as they're picking up a Casey Nash book, they know what they're getting.
Right.
That's that trust. When
Yeah.
the moment you tarnish that, the moment you break that is when it's harder to convince them to buy another copy.
Right.
Uh, One of the things that I've always loved about, I recently listened to an interview Beau Lamore did, and just him talking about how his dad tried branching out into other types of genres. Even when his dad would try changing up genre a little bit, he still held to what is a Louis L'Amour book,
Right.
because it
Right.
was still Louis L'Amour writing, and that was his basis regardless of what he tried to do. Like Last the Breed is one of the books that has a bit more other than the conventional Western novel, but it
Yeah.
still reads like a Louis L'Amour book.
Right. Absolutely. There's a phrase, a saying in the West: "You ride for the brand."
Hmm.
And I'm writing for the brand, but also in the Western genre. And I think there's a resurgence there. We're seeing
Hmm.
that. We're seeing it in with the books and publishing and all that. But now is so important for good, genuine Western writers to step
Hmm.
forward and not, like you said, not change for the nuance or for this small group of people or whatever. Just,
Hmm.
just write, and that's what you're offering. That's the menu, you know. But keep your ear open. But again, I think the stories need to be real, and that's another thing. I think with my characters, they're real people in the sense that this could have really gone on. It's
Hmm.
not just crazy way out there like, oh, that no, that doesn't make sense. I
You
mean, I've
don't
seen,
have giant steampunk spiders show up out of nowhere like Wild Wild
right.
West.
Well, and even with Jubal, he's been shot several times, almost died. I mean, very close to dying. Where it's easy to make him out to be he's bulletproof. I mean, they
Hmm.
bounce off of him. Well, that's not real. And some very um, there's a lot of tragedy that happens. But
Hmm.
again, that's where people. I always said ministry people connect more with you through your weaknesses than your strengths.
It's
But
true.
if you say, I'm struggling with that myself, or hey, pray for me, or I need a little encouragement myself, and you're saying to them, I'm not perfect. I'm a human
Hmm.
being, and I got family things, and I've got business, whatever. And the same way in this story, Jubal has problems.
Hmm.
Family at times is messed up, and there's things going on that he can't fix just like that. And so, again, the characters I think are believable, and people feel like they're kind of, man, I feel this. I think I mentioned this. One lady saying that this is my family, and I'm like, man,
Hmm.
it's powerful. They're really vested in the Jubal Stone family, and so I'm always mindful of that. I'm like, I need to be careful. Here's something I want to ask you, Terrence. This is interesting, and this is for some information that we learned, I think, on a Zoom call from our publisher, a bunch of authors we were listening. But the algorithms and all the stuff out there,
Hmm.
I learn a lot. But if I ask you what percentage of men read westerns versus women, what would you say?
I would say that probably it's over 50% of the audience are men, but that's just my assumption based on
Right,
like it's the Western. So
right.
surely men read most of this. But the flip side being I know most readers are women is the tipping difference.
That's right. And that blew me away that 55% of Western readers are women.
Wow.
And I'm like, wait a minute. Now, where did that come from? But, that's the data they have and that they
Hmm.
were looking at. Another thing, and I think this is changing a little bit what I'm about to say. This was interesting, is that most of my sales right now, 98% of my sales are from Kindle,
Hmm. Which
2% of books.
that I 100% believe just because the way
Right.
that the market
Right.
is.
But there's a little shift going on
Hmm.
is what we understand. And again, that's another thing I appreciate about my publishers. They ride those waves. They're out
Hmm.
there surfing those things, and they know, like, okay, we're seeing this, so we're pivoting. We're
Hmm.
putting like, and they're very gracious. They've sent me a bunch of books. Like tomorrow when I speak, I'll give everybody a book.
Hmm.
Well, in the past, I couldn't afford to do that. But my publisher is seeing the need for people to have a book
Yep.
in hand,
Hmm.
because if you get one Jubal Stone reader, new one, that person is liable to read 93 other books and
Hmm.
tell somebody about it, you
Yeah.
know. And so they may even give, because I hear people, I've read that, I'm gonna give it to so and so. So I think that percentage may be changing some. I don't know what the numbers are, but even still, the bigger majority are reading downloads. And then
Hmm.
the audios also come in. I've been to a number of book signings, and one of the questions from the older ones was, "Is this an audio?" And I'm like, "Man, I wish it was, but it's not. But it
Hmm.
will be."
Hmm.
And now, we're getting very close. So you got your older ones who have eye problems; they can listen. But then you got younger ones
Yeah.
who
Oh,
they're
I
reading
read
books.
audiobooks all the time.
That's right.
A buddy of mine is finishing up. Nathaniel Hummel has a book coming out in the heart of Alexandria. People listening, check it out, all that stuff. But he sent me the manuscript version, and because I can't read it while I'm working, but I can listen to it while I'm working, I just punched it into an audio generator, and it read to me at like 2x speed,
Yeah,
and I was able to read through it in a day.
that's cool. See, and that's what I'm saying. It's so important that you're pivoting on the information you're getting. Just
Hmm.
like that, like we see, like we really need to get cranking on the audios because there's market for that. Just in our age,
Well, and
because
even
people are multitasking.
yes. Well, and even for me, I love the physical copies. There's a handful of books, if I really like it, I'll get the audiobook version and the physical copy.
That's good. That's good.
And that's just there is that percentage of the
Right,
market that will do that.
right, right. Well, for me, other books, um, I mark them up so bad I couldn't give them to anybody anyway. So I do like the hardcover that I can go back to it and see where I underline things and that kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Casey, I feel like we could talk for hours, but
Yeah.
thank you for your time. Tell me, where can people go to learn more about you, your work, Jubal Stone, everything you have coming down the pipe?
Amazon's the best place. You could just type in Casey Nash. It will take you to all the books and the series. That's the best way to do it. And love to hear from anybody. I have a Casey Nash Facebook page.
Hmm.
Uh, love for them to check that out. So yeah, online is the best way. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I will link all of that in the show notes. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.